Once again, I thank Dr. Agnew, Dr. Siddharth for giving me this opportunity to talk. So today I'll be talking about osteomyelitis. I'm sure many of you may not have seen this case directly, particularly the pediatric type ones, because probably in this part of our country it is not so common as in other areas, but it's a very common entity. I have, during my post graduation, we used to see it very often, particularly in the northern region. We used to see it very commonly. So almost every week we used to see one osteomyelitis. But in Mumbai, I have not seen many cases. So that's why it becomes very important, because as Ashish said, it's an important entity both for exams and overall knowledge, because we should be able to differentiate osteomyelitis from any other infection, particularly post-operative osteomyelitis, or even after TKR, how to sort of have a high degree of suspicion you should have. So moving ahead, osteomyelitis, just with the definition, it is an infection of the bone leading to inflammatory destruction of bone, necrosis, as well as there is simultaneous new bone formation. As there is there's a low-grade infection there, it can lead to new bone formation. So there is simultaneous destruction as well as new bone formation occurring in such cases. So incidence, as I told you, it is quite common, I'm sure, in the northern areas, particularly in the area where I have, and probably in the villages also, it will be common because of inadequate hygiene and all that. But globally, it has been found to be around 2% per year in developed countries. And now with surgical care being very common of fractures and all, it is post-implant osteomyelitis as well as after fracture. It is now commonly seen in our part of the country also. So what are the risk factors? Usually the patient, particularly I'll be mostly talking about the pediatric ones because that is something rest I'm sure you know, adults will be talking a little bit about that also, but that is if you have a good fair knowledge of the pediatric variety, you will be able to sort of understand the adult one also. So usually the child comes to you that he had an injury 2 weeks back or 1 week back, and after that the swelling started. So it is basically, it is not that it is caused by injury, but the injury, there's a hematoma formation in the metaphyseal region, which ultimately leads to, I will tell you the pathogenesis of that. So it can ultimately lead to osteomyelitis if the injury is in the metaphyseal region. Previous infections, distant infections, if there are any infections in the body like UTI or even in dental infections, so anything can lead to, in fact, pyoderma. In my part of the country where I have studied, it was pyoderma was a very common entity because in cold climates there will not be a very daily regular washing and cleaning, so they would develop pyoderma, and then that would lead to osteomyelitis. Penetrating injuries, so any injury which can have a small impact in the bone can ultimately lead to osteomyelitis. Intravenous drug misuse, if you have constant intravenous drugs, you might lead, one is susceptible to infections anywhere in the body, so is osteomyelitis. Diabetes mellitus is a very common cause, particularly in the adults. You must have all seen toe infections and toe osteomyelitis, foot infections, and tarsal bone infections in diabetics, so which is a very common entity. Then immune compromised patients, HIV, recent surgery, so that I'm sure all of you have seen in post-operative, you might have seen infections in, and then ultimately leading to even a small stitch abscess can ultimately, if there is a lot of devitalization, soft tissue cover envelope is traumatized a lot, you can ultimately lead to osteomyelitis of the bone. Then CKD, kidney diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, sickle cell disease, all these are predisposed to osteomyelitis of the bones because they are compromised as well as their inflammatory mechanisms are not working so well. Coming to classification, it is basically, we know of acute and chronic, but there is a variety which is called as subacute. In fact, that is a very common entity. So acute is anything less than 2 weeks. So last 1 week history or 5 days history, 10 days history, child gives history, as I told you, history of injury 10 days back. Then he had some swelling, which we didn't, which we neglected. And now there is swelling, which is hot, which is increasing in size. So that is an acute osteomyelitis. Then subacute is anything 2 to 6 weeks. So there was some infection or there was a penetrating injury which we was neglected, and ultimately it leads to subacute osteomyelitis. And chronic is once it is an old, like in implants, if they come back after 6 weeks of surgery, they might have osteomyelitis. So anything more than 6 weeks, we would classify as chronic osteomyelitis. And then persistent relapsed infection, even in TKR, you might have seen that after around 3 months, they come back with hot joint and then things like that. So that is a chronic osteomyelitis. So there is the treatment protocols are different in case of chronic osteomyelitis. Infection associated with prosthetic device, TKR, THR, and histological evidence. You might suddenly see there's a small, as you can see in plates, you will see lysis around the screws, and then or if you remove implant on removal, sometimes you see there is some pus coming out, which is if you send it for biopsy, you'll find it, or we send for cell counts and all that. So that is a histological evidence. So all that is chronic, while acute will be anything less than 2 weeks will be. So there are different classifications, but something which is, of course, it is not followed by clinically, it is not followed so well, but as far as classification is concerned, it is a very, for auditing purposes, it is a good classification where you have grade A, B, C, D, E, and F, depending on the regions, as well as like it is modified now, Robert modification of Gladhill classification, where A is a punched out radiolucency, 1B is punched out with a sclerotic margin. That means there is a healing mechanism going on. So Brody's abscess can be sort of as a differential diagnosis. Then grade 3 is the localized cortical periosteal reaction. You might suddenly see periosteal reactions, or there might be a diffused periosteal, like onion skin periosteal reaction, which is confused with Ewing sarcoma, because Ewing sarcoma is a differential diagnosis for acute osteomyelitis. Many times you can miss it. So you have to always keep that as a differential diagnosis in pediatric age group. Then there may be a central radiolucency in epiphysis. So there is differential diagnosis of chondroblastoma, and destructive process involving vertebral body, which is classified as grade 6, type 6, where it is present in the vertebral bodies. They come out suddenly with, you confuse it with tuberculosis, but they are actually acute infection. They are pyogenic infection, so they're classified. So that is a classification of subacute. So where I told you, it is more than 2 weeks. They keep coming to your OPD. ASR is raised, CRP is raised. So they don't have any florid signs of infection like fever and this, and they might come out with punched out lesions or something like that, where you confuse them with any other entity as I have shown in the differential diagnosis, eosinophil granuloma, Brody's, etc. So they always become in the back of the mind, they are your differential diagnosis. So whenever you see such lesions, you can consider them as your differential diagnosis, as is displayed on the screen. So causative organisms, bacteria or fungus may be the cause of infection. Most commonly, we see bacteria. Bloodstream, what is called as hematogenous osteomyelitis. It is most frequent, and nearly 90% of cases are caused by Staphylococcus aureus, which is the most common organism. In infants, you also see group B streptococci, particularly after sore throat or something in children. Earlier, it used to be very common. Now it is not. We don't see earlier in my post-residency, we used to always do their cardiac status checkup and find out if there are any infected colonies in their sore throat and all that, because they used to come with present with osteomyelitis. Then there are other organisms like Pseudomonas, Escherichia coli, E. coli. They're all Klebsiella. They all hospital-acquired infections like Pseudomonas. That can, like in your implants, post-implant, you might see osteomyelitis. So cause could be hospital-acquired. So their organisms are different, like Pseudomonas and all. So most common is still 90% is caused by Staphylococcus. Sometimes it may be methicillin resistant, but usually it is Staph aureus. So pathogenesis, coming to pathogenesis, microorganisms may infect bone through via bloodstream when it is called as hematogenous spread, hematogenous osteomyelitis. Contiguously from the second, as I told you, there might be a penetrating wound, or there may be a small, like even in stitch abscess, that is a contiguous infection. So if there is a stitch infection in your any plating or even in TKR, which ultimately leads to, that is a contiguous stage. So there is cellulitis and there is deep infection, then persistent discharge. So that means it has gone into, so if the discharge is persisting for more than 2 weeks, then you classify it as osteomyelitis. You have to change your treatment protocol. And same thing is about penetrating trauma. You might see just a small wound, the iron rod is hit on the leg, the wound healed, but underlying there is infection developing, which presents after 2 to 3 weeks. So they come back to you with osteomyelitis. It is a very, it's not a very uncommon entity. It is very common. But mostly in pediatric age group, you will see hematogenous spread. So mechanisms: hematogenous, contiguous source, no generalized vascular disease. That is, if there is any vascularized disease like ischemic limbs, suppose you have done some surgery. I had a patient where he had an ischemic limb, we had done plating, and then it went into osteomyelitis. So it is also, that is why in knee replacements also, we many times do vascular studies if there is any. So one thing very important in a TKR is you should always put a hand on your dorsalis pedis pulse. So that is something by instinctively you should see, because if there is no pulse, there is ischemia. Even if you've done an excellent job, it might lead to osteomyelitis. So that is something very you should always remember whenever you are doing some invasive procedure in distal leg, tibia, which is a very, very avascular area. You have to look for vascular issues in such cases. So coming to mechanisms, bacteria in bloodstream, either dental wounds, pediatric, you have tonsillitis is very common, otitis media is very common. Trivial wounds or scratches, as I told you, boils, pyoderma, all these can lead to, they can suddenly come to you with the swelling in the upper end of the tibia, which is painful, which the patient is limping, and that you need to have a very high suspicion that this could be osteomyelitis. That is what is the trick in this osteomyelitis. So if you miss them, they will lead into deep florid osteomyelitis, which can ultimately become a chronic osteomyelitis. So your sense of suspicion has to be very strong in such cases, particularly in areas like we are in right now, Mumbai. So if you don't have, like in West, they say that tuberculosis is something very exotic, but in India, you can easily detect tuberculosis. So similarly in osteomyelitis, if you go to North, if you go to Kashmir, Srinagar, osteomyelitis every student will be knowing, but here you might not be able to diagnose it because you have not seen enough. But it is particularly in lower income groups, and like if you go to a municipal hospital, you will probably see them more often than you see in a private hospital. So pathomechanism, so there is acute inflammation, there is increase, so there is a hematoma formation in the metaphysis because of the trivial injury, because this is a cancellous area. There is very spongy bone, there are a lot of spaces, interstitial spaces there. So the blood collects there, it forms, there is pooling of the blood. So there is increased intramedullary pressure, which goes on. So there is cell formation, so there is vascular collapse, the end arteries and all those, they stop supplying. So there is again florid infection. So then there is surrounding avascular bone. So infection goes. So it is a cycle which goes on. The more organisms come in, more cells come in. So there is a lot of inflammatory reaction. So that inflammation spreads through the Haversian system in the nutrient canal, and then there is lifting of the periosteum. That is when you see a new bone formation. So you'll see a small streak of new bone on the outside. That is the first sign of radiological sign of osteomyelitis. So that by that time, almost a period of 10 days has gone. So this is a story of 10 days. So if you have missed those 10 days, that means the infection has spread. So that is why you need, what I was telling, that you need a very high degree of suspicion in this case. So you have to catch them somewhere in the second stage in this increased intramedullary pressure. So when you have to decompress the bone, you have to release the pus, and so that it doesn't allow the osteomyelitis to spread. Otherwise, this is patient is bound once you have reached the elevation of once you see in a periosteal elevation, that means it is already spread to the Haversian system. So there is very high chance of chronic osteomyelitis. So further disruption of the blood supply and further avascular bone, so then there is sequestrum formation. So that is very important to understand the whole mechanism. So even in management, this you have to keep in mind. So when you are getting the patient, you have to decide the protocol. There are very clear-cut mechanisms which are working, and that is what you have to stop. So bone is infected, leukocytes enter the infected area, release of enzyme that lies the bone, pus spreads into the bone, blood, which I told you. So area of devitalized bone. So suddenly there will be something like a sequestrum here. So this is this sequestrum. So that is the involucrum. So the surrounding bone, which is new bone formation there, which is trying to protect this. It is trying to eat up and create a protective mechanism outside it. So that is called as involucrum. So this is the dead bone. That is the sequestrum. So this is a definition they will ask you very commonly in the exam. So what is the sequestrum? So sequestrum is a dead bone lying in the pus, in the surrounding granulation tissues. So there is lysis all around it, and this is a dead bone. So that is the definition. And involucrum is a surrounding bone, which is the bone for new bone formation, which is trying to provide scaffolding this bone. So that is the active bone. That is the vascular bone. This is the avascular bone, and in between there will be granulation. So all around this there is granulation. So that is sequestra, that is involucrum, and this pus, this needs to go out. So it cannot keep collecting there. It will break through somewhere, through the Haversian system, through the canals. So those small outpourings, these are called as cloacae. So there will be something like a hole from which the pus will go from sequestrum, the dead bone, from this pool of pus, it will go out. It will try to auto decompress itself. So it will try to go out. So that is what is called as cloacae. So this you must remember. They will any exam, if you have a case of osteomyelitis or a spot of osteomyelitis, you will have a specimen of osteomyelitis. They will ask you this question: what is involucrum? What is cloacae? What is sequestrum? So you should be very clear what it is. And it is classic, means that is something in osteomyelitis you will never forget. If you know these three things, you will probably know. So osteomyelitis is an infective process which encompasses all the bones. So there is bone lysis, there is bone formation. So osteoclasis, osteoblast formation. So everything is happening there. So simultaneous life and death is occurring there. So it is like that. So when it is chronic, it can lead to bone sclerosis and deformity. So there is a lot of new bone formation. It is trying to lay down more bone. Then there is simultaneous osteoclasis occurring. So infant infection can spread to the joint. So that is something very important. So if suppose it is in an infant where the epiphyseal plate has not grown yet, so there is no barrier. There is no epiphyseal barrier. I will probably have it in the next slide. So there is no epiphyseal barrier, or in the areas, the joints which are intracapsular. So suppose there is hip. So if there is osteomyelitis of the neck of the femur, uh, uh, neck of the femur, so that will have, it is intracapsular. So it will have septic arthritis. It will present to you as septic arthritis. So similarly, in infants where there is no epiphyseal formation, so it will present as septic arthritis. But in an older child where the epiphyseal plate has come, the barrier is there. So if there is development of osteomyelitis in the metaphysis, it will not. The physeal plate acts as a barrier. So the infection will not cross to the joint. So you may not have septic arthritis in an older child, but in an infant, that is what is in hips, in very small infants. So babies which are from the ICU, they come out, suddenly they have swelling in the hip, and you realize that it is septic arthritis, you aspirate it, and by the time they grow, there is no epiphysis. The whole growth plate has been destroyed. That's what's called as Tom Smith arthritis. So where you have a very flail joint, which is, there is no growth plate there. So it is because it is all destroyed, because it is an intracapsular. But in knee, you have an extracapsular, and in an older child where there is barrier has come, epiphyseal plate has appeared, then there will not So, and then you need to differentiate between osteomyelitis and septic arthritis, which I'll tell you in the differential diagnosis. So there are other sites like tibia, femur, humerus, vertebra, maxilla, mandibular bone. Especially these are all wherever there is a lot of spongy bone, they are all susceptible to osteomyelitis. Even phalanx sometimes can present as osteomyelitis. In feet, you will see fungal osteomyelitis because you have small penetrating wounds, micro penetrating wounds, which particularly in these farmers and all those who work naked, barefoot in the fields, they are prone to develop these fungal osteomyelitis because of this. So that is direct contiguous, not hematogenous. Uh, so as I told you, abscess of any bone, however, maybe trauma. So as I told you, it's because it is metaphyseal bone, there is cancellous bone, it is a very spongy bone. There are lots of interstices, interspaces present. So where there is a small hematoma which collects there. So if it causes a lot of pressure there, there is necrosis. So then further cells pour in. So they increase the pressure. So there is necrosis. So that is why trauma. Usually we will we may ignore that it's a micro trauma. It will not cause any problem, but that there is a history which these children give that they had injury 1 week back or 10 days back. We neglected and then they came with osteomyelitis. So metaphysis is the common site. So why metaphysis is the common, particularly upper end of tibia? You can see here, as I told you, this is cancellous bone. There's a lot of interspaces as compared to the cortical bone, where the bone is more, the interstices are not so wide and apart. So you have a lot of space here. So any small hematoma will collect there. Then the end arteries, these are like hairpin arrangement. It's like they are going up and then there are sudden turns, 180-degree turns. So these act as these hair bends. There is stasis there. So if any organism lodges there, it's like a clot formation there, and then it starts spreading there. So there is endarteritis, breaking of the arterial wall, and then there is spreading of the whole pathogen keeps on spreading there. So there is, and since it is a cancellous area, so it spreads very fast. So that is why the pressure builds up. Then there is more and more necrosis, more and it fills up, and then there is a large hematoma, this infection formation, which ultimately goes through the Haversian system here, and then it lies down subperiosteally here. So there is, that is called a subperiosteal abscess. So patient might present to you if it is because of the pressure, there is pain, and then as the periosteum is lifted, it is very painful. So then the pain, suddenly there is very severe pain because of the periosteal lifting. So that abscess. So if at all, you have to pick it up around this stage. So that there is, because once it spreads to the medullary canal, it spreads through. So there is chances of osteomyelitis are very high. So that is the mechanism. So there is relative lack of phagocytes. So phagocytosis is in this area because of is much less, because these are end arteries and there are hairpin bends. So the cell formation is less, but then and there is no the foreign bodies are not eaten up so well, and dead space because of cancellous bone, as I told you, and as it is subcutaneous bone, it is prone to injury. So you must have usually seen that kid comes with injury in the tibia only. It is not how often you see soft tissue injuries in thigh. It is more usually on the shin. So somebody is hit by the football, somebody is hit by somebody else's boot, or with the table also, you generally hit up in the tibia only. So all this is subcutaneous bone. So there is hematoma formation, and the upper end of tibia is very susceptible. So that is why you see it. Osteomyelitis of the upper end tibia is very, very common as compared to any other area. Okay, so so there is presentation is like rapid onset of pain and tenderness, as I told you, at different stages. So as there is lifting of the periosteum, so they become very painful. So periosteal nerve endings are very sensitive. So once there is lifting of the periosteum, it becomes very painful. So the fever, rigors, malaise, all these signs of inflammation keep coming at that time. That is when the patient presents to you. There may be no localizing signs initially. They might come with just dull pain there. They will always ascribe it to the injury. They will say that we had injury, so even you might ignore it, saying that is injury, give him some analgesic. But that is why I said you need to have a very high degree of suspicion. You should feel the localized tenderness, and then and other markers you have to keep in mind all the time. So if there is any associated compromised immunity or malnutrition, as I told you, lower income group children who are emaciated, not well fed, they might be more. So you need to have a degree of suspicion there. So unwell child with bone is all this is a predisposing factor. So any child, any infant or any child who has tenderness, swelling at the proximal end of the tibia or near the metaphysis, you should consider it as osteomyelitis unless proved otherwise. So you have to disprove yourself by doing the proper tests and evaluation. Otherwise, it is all osteomyelitis. So don't leave them alone, because then you lose the time, and then by the time you really diagnose it, it is chronic, or it becomes chronic, subacute or a chronic osteomyelitis. So symptoms, as I told you, weight loss, fatigue, fever, localized wound, swelling, erythema, and tenderness. So initially there may be just redness, or as I said, there may be a small penetrating wound. But over a period of time, if you neglect it first time, by the time they come back after 1 week, you will see already there is bony changes have started. So when the bony change has started, periosteum is elevated. That means it is already becoming a full set osteomyelitis. So it is going into the subacute variety. So once you have seen the patient, you have had a high degree of suspicion, there is local temperature rise, tenderness at the metaphysis, painful movements, then you will need to do hematological investigation. So usually WBC count, which will be elevated, usually, but it is not a very strong indicator. So you might have, as I told you, there may be emaciated children, compromised children, or even adults. So you may not see a corresponding increase in WBC count. That is not a very sensitive marker for infection. So never ignore a normal WBC count with absolute normality. Then ESR, it is increased within 4 to 5. It's a very rapid, quick acting business. ESR will rise within just 4 or 5 days of infection, but then it is not a very good prognostic indicator. It will decrease very slowly, as compared to CRP, which is very sensitive, rises within 6 hours, but then it falls also very quickly. So if your patient is responding to treatment, that means it is responding well. So that is an indicator where I will tell you in management, you will use this as your indicator, so marker. So don't depend on ESR. You will depend, like particularly in acute osteomyelitis. In a chronic variety like tuberculosis or all, you might depend on ESR. But in acute osteomyelitis, if you have to change your tack, if you have to change your treatment protocol, then CRP would be a good indicator. So then there are other things like procalcitonin. It raised in bacterial infections, but in viral it may not be. So that is again a sensitive indicator for infection. So if you're like even in TKR, we can suppose we have a high degree of suspicion that this might be infection. So you can do CRP, you can do procalcitonin. That is a good indicator. If they are rising, that means there is something wrong. I'm not talking of immediate post-op, because in post-op you might get, even in normal surgery, you might get raised CRP, but procalcitonin will be a good indicator. Then blood culture. So as soon as you see the patient, first thing you can do is, while you are sending his WBC count, if you have a strong suspicion, you should send a blood culture. Although it is not again a very sensitive, only in 25 to 30% patients you might find a blood culture positive. That would be great if you get positive. But if you don't get an organism in the blood culture, that doesn't mean there is no infection. But it is a good indicator. The moment before you start antibiotics as a first line of treatment, when you're about to give antibiotics, before that you can do a blood culture, so that you have a basic baseline that there was this organism which was grown in the blood. So at least you know the culture once you are definitely giving definitive antibiotics. Then comes aspiration. Sometimes if there is a swelling, as in case of a subperiosteal abscess, if you are feeling there's a bulky swelling there, there's a sort of ballotment like swelling in the proximal area, which you can feel, it is soft to pressure, then you can do aspiration also. If you want to be very sure, you want to be very aggressive, you can do aspiration. And sometimes in case of septic arthritis, suppose you have a doubt between septic arthritis or osteomyelitis, so you can do aspiration in those cases and send it to culture. And biopsy, again, if you're not, suppose you have subacute type of variety where you have a sort of a small lytic lesion, you are not very sure Whether it is Cox, you can do biopsy in such cases. Then coming to imaging, again a very important modality of management. So radiograph is the gold standard. Recommended views are AP lateral, as you all know. Early films may be normal, as I told you. First 10 days, if you see, as you can see here, periosteal elevation, that means it's already more than 10 days old. So that is a process where the whole hematoma, this infection starts coming, traveling from the central metaphysis towards the Haversian system, and then it lifts the periosteum. So first 10 days, as soon as you get a patient in the ER, in the casualty, you may not get anything on the X-ray except maybe sometimes some osteopenic area there or just a hazy metaphysis. So that doesn't mean it is not osteomyelitis. So what you can do in such patients, you can repeat the X-ray after 10 days and see that suppose you have treated them on antibiotics, you have not been very aggressive by doing surgery. So if you want to be sure that whatever, so suppose patient responds to antibiotics, IV antibiotics, as soon as you have started them on second day or third day. But to be sure, you should call back the patient after 10 days and see that X-ray. So if there is periosteal elevation, that means that it is osteomyelitis. So that confirms your doubt. But of course, that means that it has spread to the medullary canal, it has spread to the Haversian system, and it has caused lifting of the periosteum. So chances of chronic osteomyelitis are very high and it can be a prognostic indicator also. So periosteal bone formation is after 7 to 10 days. Osteolysis means then full-fledged osteolysis has come. That means 10 to 14 days it will start appearing. And then late films, 1 to 2 weeks, show metaphyseal rarefaction, reduction in metaphyseal bone density, or even abscess can be seen. So X-rays is very important, but it should be repeated if it is not present in the first case. CT scan is helpful later in the disease, like in chronic osteomyelitis. In acute osteomyelitis, it is not very important, but in chronic osteomyelitis, you can see it as the extent of the cecostrum. You want to see the whole size of the cecostrum. If you want to drain it or you want to do cecostectomy, you can do a CT scan and see the amount of lysis there is, amount of extent of the lysis, which you may not be able to see on a X-ray. So you will need to do a CT scan and see the size. Like in chronic osteomyelitis, suppose you have to do some surgery, you need to see the full size of the cecostrum so that you make a window large enough. You should not try to remove the cecostrum piecemeal. I'll tell that in the chronic osteomyelitis. So CT scan becomes very important investigation in such cases. Then these days we have MRI, which is an excellent modality. So suppose you have a doubt on your X-rays, you don't want to waste any time for 10 days to see when the periosteal elevation will occur. So you can do an MRI. It detects subtle metaphyseal changes, signal changes can be picked up on MRI. So you can see metaphyseal, there is a glow, even because basic edema is there. It can pick up it is a very sensitive modality which was not earlier available, but now it is everywhere. Anybody can ask. So price should not be an indicator. Price should not be an issue in such cases because it means a lot if you have picked it, the timing of picking the disease. So indications can assist in decision making, poor clinical response. If you are given antibiotics, suppose you are seeing just it's a soft tissue infection, you are not worried. To be very doubly sure, you can do an MRI and be sure that it is or not in the bone. So you may not consider surgery in such cases. You can do only IV antibiotics and it can respond. But if there is any metaphyseal changes, then you will have to think of surgical drainage and decompression. So on T1 signal is decreased, T2 with gadolinium enhancement, it is a very, very sensitive. It becomes a very almost 100% sensitivity can be done with this. So it is very easy to do investigation and it can pick up very early infections. Bone scan earlier was an important modality, particularly in higher centers, but now I don't think many people do it. Technician scan was a very sensitive. WBC label scans and leukocytes label scans were very useful in picking up osteomyelitis. But now it is not. I think MRI has completely replaced it. It is also very sensitive, 92%. But it is for students, I think it's important to remember that this is a diagnostic tool. So, what is the criteria for diagnosis? So, you may not remember the name. Just for your this that there is a name called Petula and Vahavanam criteria, but you may not remember. What we generally remember is only these points. What are the criteria? So, purulent aspirate. So, if you have aspirated and you have got a purulent aspirate from the affected bone, positive bone tissue or blood culture. If your culture is positive and there is local tenderness, there is swelling, erythema at the metaphysis, then localized physical findings, bony tenderness, overlying soft tissue edema, and erythema, and positive radiological imaging. All these are the clinical signs and markers of the osteomyelitis. So then your diagnosis is confirmed. So these are the criteria. As it is very difficult to remember the name, so it's just that students, I thought I'll. But so basically, whenever you see all this, then you can consider the diagnosis of osteomyelitis. So differential diagnosis, as I told you, is osteomyelitis, tenderness in metaphyseal region, induration, adjacent joint range is restricted. Then other thing is septic arthritis. I'll tell you how to differentiate. And Ewing sarcoma, it becomes in pediatric age group, it becomes a very important. So metaphyseal tenderness, local temperature raise, mild fever, that can be even Ewing sarcoma. So there is a very wide spectrum of disease. On one end you have osteomyelitis, on the other end you have Ewing sarcoma. But that is why it needs a very high degree of suspicion. So these are the three important diagnostic differential diagnosis in such cases. So coming to management, so as I told you, most important is high degree of suspicion, particularly in our area where we don't see it so often. So students should have a very high degree of suspicion. As I told you, all these criteria, what is Petula criteria, all those metaphyseal tenderness, swelling, restricted range of motion in the adjacent joint, fever, all those things should immediately light up the your brain that this could be osteomyelitis unless proved otherwise. So every metaphyseal swelling, every metaphyseal tenderness in a pediatric age group is osteomyelitis unless proved otherwise. So do not waste time. So don't send them home and then give analgesics and let them come back. Usually we give that masala of calcium and analgesics even because we think that it is injury, so you'll go home. In fact, you tell them to give some ointment massage and all that. So don't waste time. So a high degree of suspicion. So by the time he comes back after 1 week and his pain has increased, you have missed the bus. You already allowed it to become subacute osteomyelitis and ultimately chronic osteomyelitis. So do not waste time in such thing. Have a high degree of send blood investigation. As we know, every around that we are blamed for over investigation. Patient might, but write on the paper that these investigations are to be done. If he doesn't do, it is not your fault. But insist and genuinely insist that these investigations, at least a CRP, at least an ESR, at least a blood count, and if possible is taken, you can even do blood culture in such cases if you have a high degree of suspicion. So, and then follow it up with at least an X-ray after 5 to 7 days again. So then only you can leave that patient alone. Otherwise, you may send it home as an injury, and by the time he comes back, it is osteomyelitis. So then, if you have already suspected it, then start broad spectrum parenteral antibiotics. So you can give any cephalosporin or any broad spectrum antibiotic for the time being till your blood culture comes, or you have done some other investigation to know that this is confirmed osteomyelitis. And meanwhile, maintain hydration. These pediatric kids, they get dehydrated very fast. So maintain their hydration. So otherwise they will be in a moribund state and then they will become very toxic. I have seen children with osteomyelitis even die because they become septicemic very fast. If they're immune compromised, lower income groups are not fed well, if you have delayed, then they can go into septicemia and they can die. So maintain hydration. We have a constant vigil. As I told you, CRP is the best indicator for early treatment success and normalizes within a week. So it will rise within 6 hours. It will fall within 1 week if you're done given a proper antibiotic and your patient is responding. If it is increasing, that means you are not on the right track. So failure of C-reactive protein to decline after 48 to 72 hours should indicate the treatment needs to be altered. So change the treatment, change the time. So again, then there are principles of treatment of acute hematogenous osteomyelitis. appropriate antibiotic will be effective before pus formation. So if you give, the moment the patient has come you, as I told you, if you have a high degree of suspicion, he came with swelling since yesterday, mild fever, if you start antibiotics, we can respond. You can sort of treat them with only IV antibiotics. Uh, so you may not need a surgical procedure in such cases. But if there is avascular tissue formation, so as I told you, if there is spread of the pus, this pus, it has gone to the subperiosteal level, then there is a lot of avascular tissue, so your antibiotics will not penetrate, and so then you will need to surgically decompress them. If such removal is effective, antibiotics should prevent the reformation, therefore primary closure should be safe. So I'll tell you that in the surgical part. So if you have been able to decompress it very early, then you may primarily close it. So you don't need to keep it open like we keep in chronic osteomyelitis and allow drainage. But if you have decompressed it well, so surgery further should not damage already ischemic bone. So when to do what surgery is very important. I'll tell that in the next few slides. So antibiotics have to be continued after surgery. Normally we give up to from 3 to 6 weeks as we follow the CRP and ESR, and give almost up to, generally it is believed that we should give for 6 weeks IV antibiotics, or at least IV for 3 weeks and then oral for 6 weeks to prevent chronic osteomyelitis. So indications for surgery in acute osteomyelitis: abscess formation, severely ill and moribund child. As I told you, they can become subtly toxic, septicemic. So you need to decompress this very fast. Don't waste time on antibiotics. They may not be resistant. If your blood culture has not come positive, then you are wasting your time on the antibiotic. You may not have the right antibiotic. So decompress them very fast. They respond very well, and you can prevent septicemia in such children. Failure of to respond to antibiotics for more than 4 hours is a good, strong indication for surgery. So then coming to surgical part, so this is something I want to tell you. So once you have decided that you want to, it has not responded to infection, it has not responded to antibiotics. So you have decided to do surgery. So what should you do? So first you give skin incision there. So if you see pus coming out, that means it is already extraperiosteal. It has come out from the periosteum. Just below the skin, pus has come out. So that means it is already drained. So you may not, you just drain it, give a good lavage and finish it. That is all. Because don't create more dead bone by doing periosteal lifting and all that. So you will create more dead bone. So if it is already under the skin, that means it is already drained. It has come out somewhere. So then there's no point. So you just have to drain the pus. So if there is no pus, then you reach the periosteum. Periosteum may be bulged. You may give a nick there and pus will come out. So that again means that it has lifted the periosteum. It has come out. You can just cut the periosteum full and then let the pus completely drain out. Again, you need not do anything in the bone. But if you have incised the periosteum, still pus has not come out, then what do you do? But your suspicion is very strong, so you can make small drill holes there. So suddenly, as you make the drill hole and connect to the medullary cavity, the pus will start, the flakes will start coming out. It will start just jetting out of those drill holes. That means there is still, it needs decompression. So then you make a window. Then you make a proper window. But if there is no pus coming out in the drill holes, you may leave it like that. So then either your diagnosis is incorrect, or you don't create further periosteal elevation and create more dead bones. So then leave it like that if there is no pus coming out from the drill holes. But if there is pus pouring out from the small drill holes, then you should connect all the drill holes and then make a small window there so that there is complete decompression of the bone. So you make a wide window. Okay, I hope I have made it very clear to you. So once again, I repeat, if pus comes out just below the skin, that means it is already drained. You don't need to do further devascularization of the tissues. So just drain out, give a good wash, see that pus pockets are there and clean them. Then if you reach the periosteum, still there is no pus and you give an incision there. If the pus comes out under the periosteum, fine, it is already decompressed. You just clean the periosteum, lift it and then let it fall down. Don't lift it further so that causes more devascularization. But if there is no pus below the periosteum and you are in doubt what to do, whether I should make a drill hole or not, then you should, whether I should make a window or not, then you should first make a drill hole. If the drill hole is pouring out with pus, then you make a proper window. If there is no drill pus and your site is correct, you are sure that it is in the area what you have done, then please don't make the windows, because then you will cause more devascularization. So then whatever was as a contiguous thing, it might become osteomyelitis. So it may just have been on soft tissue injury or something like that. So management is early diagnosis, as I told you, high degree of suspicion, pick it up very fast. Don't waste time, start broad spectrum antibiotics. If it is not responding in 48 hours, your CRP is rising, then go in for surgery, do what I told you to do, like making drill holes and so debridement of pus and necrotic tissue, complete debridement should be done, connect all the pouches and in neonates, you can start broad spectrum antibiotics like cefuroxime. In children, again, broad spectrum cefuroxime, or if you get culture, then you can do specific antibiotics. Generally with Staph aureus, which is the 90% causative organism, and they respond well to cefuroxime. And adult, you can give amoxicillin, cloxacillin combinations and in proper doses. So that is what you need to do. Make a proper window, wide window, so that it is completely drained, so that there is no and avoid further devascularization in these patients. So complications, as I told you, septicemia can be in infants and young children, younger children. It is very common to get septicemia. Pyarthrosis, if it is a contiguous joint, or it is very young children where there is epiphyseal barrier is not present, it can lead to pyarthrosis. And chronic osteomyelitis is a very common entity in acute osteomyelitis, unless you have done very early management, and pathological fracture in certain cases. So these are the common four side effects, the complications in acute osteomyelitis. Then coming to chronic osteomyelitis, it is whenever the infection is deep set, it is more devascularization, or diagnosis has been late, inadequate management of acute osteomyelitis, or even in exogenous like implants. So there you can't help, because it is a very slow process. By the time you have picked it up, it has become chronic. So it is common in adults. Soft tissue traumas, compound fractures, chronic ulcers, diabetic mellitus, and neuropathies, they are very common causes of chronic osteomyelitis. So anything more than 6 weeks is a chronic osteomyelitis. It leads to, so there is simultaneous new bone formation and osteolysis, which leads to deformity of the bones also. Then something like Brody's abscess is a subacute type of infection where there is a low-grade infection going on. There is a surrounding sclerotic area, as you can see here, and it may be adjacent to any epiphyseal plate, or it may be isolated in the metaphyses surrounding by. So it is a low-grade infection. Will come with usually they will come with pain, deep set pain. They will off and on. And sometimes they might come with a sudden discharging sinus, and when they get relief of pain, when the abscess is drained, auto drained, so they get relief, and then again it collects. So because there is a avascular bone, so they come with these phases of pain and no pain. They might have a small sinus which they have ignored. So this is chronic osteomyelitis. There may be some cecostrum seen there, very small. You can even have a differential diagnosis of osteoid osteoma in such cases. So high degree of suspicion again is very important. You have a sclerotic edge. You might not have a nidus here in chronic osteomyelitis, while in case of osteomyelitis. So CT scan in such cases becomes an important diagnostic modality to differentiate it from different entities like osteoid osteoma. They can, if it is adjacent to the epiphyseal plate, it can cause growth disturbances. So there is failure of this part of the growth plate to grow while the other areas may grow. So there will be angular deformities or growth disturbances. They may not grow properly. So growth disturbances is a common complication of these periepiphyseal abscesses or chronic osteomyelitis. So treatment in such cases is curettage. So if it is presenting regularly with pain, you can open up, curate the whole cavity, and you can either fill it with antibiotic cement or even with normal bone cement, and or sometimes we use vascular pedicles and all that, which is a very different topic that we will not talk about right now. Then unusual presentations is what is called as osteomyelitis of Gare. These are This is a type of chronic osteomyelitis where you have very sclerotic bone. You don't see a proper cavity, but then you see sclerotic bone. So as I told you, there are all the processes of bone formation are there. Formation and osteoclasis is simultaneous. But in this case, you will see only thickening sclerosis of the bones. So again, this can be confused with osteoid osteoma. But in osteoid osteoma, you will see a nidus, which is very typical of osteoid osteoma. Even in Ewing's, you will see new bone formation there. So you have to, in such cases, you can, other markers have to be used and maybe biopsy finally to differentiate. So this is an unusual presentation, what is called as osteomyelitis of Gall. So again, you can see large cavity here, in lysis and sclerosis simultaneously. It can be picked up on a CT scan, and then you can even see discharging sinuses there. You can even do the sinusograms there and see that the sinus is leading to this cavity. So CT becomes a very important, CT and MRI in such cases. So because again, they need decompression. This is chronic osteomyelitis. They need decompression, wide opening of the canal and packing the cavity. So in chronic osteomyelitis, what you do is the bacteriology. So you grow the culture, you can do culture sensitivity of these aspirates. And then you can do sinusogram, as you can see here. See that the sinus is communicating with the cecostrum here. So there will be a deep cecostrum here. So the CT becomes a very important tool in such case. So even MRI may not be able to pick up a good small cecostrum, but in a CT you will be able to see a cecostrum there. So sinusogram and even bones, hot spot or a cold spot, you can pick it up with bone scan, differentiate it from any other entity like malignancies or chronic infections. So principles of treatment, as I told you, this is antibiotics. But in chronic osteomyelitis, we don't, if they generally come, there's no role of antibiotics as such as a definitive treatment. Antibiotics is just a cover when you are planning debridement or you have done some activity like drainage of this sinus or something, then you can give antibiotics. Otherwise, to treat them definitely with the antibiotics is not done. So you need to, because it is a deep-seated infection, already spread to the Haversian system, so where the antibiotics will not reach. So there is no role of antibiotics in such cases. So you need to make a big window in such cases, curatize the whole thing, clean the whole cavities, and then fill it up with either cement, bone cement, or an antibiotic cement, or even you can use a muscle pedicle transposition there, and then pack up the whole cavity so that it becomes vascularized. There are different methods. I think that is a different entity. We can talk about that in non-unions and infected non-unions as a treatment, where you do cancellous grafting, put a vascular area there, and then do these cancellous grafting in such areas. You can use a composite muscle pedicle graft there, or we do it in stages. We can pack it up with the antibiotic cement, and then in the second stage graft it, and then cover the whole thing with a flap. So treatment is reconstruction, autogenous cancellous bone grafting, vascularized bone grafting. You can see a vascular fibula has been used. We used to do this a lot earlier, but now with the Ilizarov and other things, vascularized bone graft has not, because you need a plastic surgeon in such cases. So as orthopedic surgeons believe only in themselves, so we depend on the Ilizarov. So we do bone transport in such cases, do exercise, and then do this, what's called as distraction osteogenesis. If it is a small gap cecostrum, we just compress it together and then do an osteotomy or corticotomy at the peripheral area, and then slowly distract it to get the length. So antibiotic impregnated cement, as I told you, we can do it in stages, pack the whole area in the with the antibiotic cement, and then do secondary surgery and fill it up either with a fibula graft, or do it a vascularized fibula, or even do bone transport. So just few, as I told you, you can, this is a small bodies like abscess, chronic osteomyelitis, a large cavity. You can see it on a CT scan. So you can do aspirate and send it for culture. and then do a primary curettage and then pack it up with, you can see here it is antibiotic beads. These pack it up with antibiotic beads, and in the secondary stage we can do and take it out and then do bone grafting, or even pack it with fibula, big dowels of fibula or an hyalocrest graft with corticocancellous graft and fill it off. So complications are septicemia, recurrence, pathological fractures, skin problems, malignancy, and amyloidosis. When there is chronic infection, it can lead to amyloidosis, which is a very rare complication, but it is, for your exam purposes, this is a very well sought answer by the examiners. So growth disturbances, as I told you, if it is adjacent to the growth plate infection, it is like it can cause growth disturbances in kids. Okay, I think that is all. If you have any questions, you can ask. Treatment I have not given in detail, that we can talk in non-unions. I think we can have a topic on non-unions where we can discuss in detail chronic osteomyelitis as well as infected non-unions. So any other question you can ask me.